Hey everybody, I just wanted to do a little lecture about careers in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to kind of give people an idea about what they might do with all this stuff that we've been talking about this quarter and making the world a more equitable place. And so this is just a little thumbnail of some of the ways that we think about careers in DEI. And this is a relatively new field when we use this idea of diversity and inclusion, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. It kind of comes under a couple of different titles, but it really based on the idea of making sure that companies or organizations are respectful and inclusive and reflect the communities that they serve. Here's a really interesting statistic that blew my mind. That a lot of this is brand new, summer of 2020 new. You know, after the George Floyd protests really sort of captured the imagination of a lot of people, including in corporate America, including white people who hadn't really thought about these things. According to Indeed.com, in the months following the protest of the summer of 2020, DEI job postings increased 129%. 129%, which means there was a whole bunch of institutions that realized they need to get serious about diversity and equity work and started creating jobs. And so this is, a great opportunity to be sort of a new person in this field, because there are all these new positions that are here this year that weren't here last year, because we're having a shift in our values as a culture, which is a good thing. And so they come in various sectors. Some of these jobs, a lot of these jobs are in the private sector. That are companies like healthcare companies, shoe companies. Nike is always hiring diversity and equity people. Banks, I know On Point has a job posting for an equity manager right now, and so a lot of the private companies, they're in the public sector, working at state and local governments, working in the school system. I have a friend who was a teacher at Westview High School, is now the director of equity for Washington County school systems. And so, working in the public sector is a big one. And then also in nonprofits and NGOs, which stands for non-government organizations. Nonprofits, including labor unions, have diversity people, and faith-based charities. And even, I was just looking today at Doctors Without Frontiers, who does a lot of incredible work providing health care to people in war zones around the world. They have a DEI director and some real clear DEI values. And what I would challenge you to do, just to get a kind of an idea, is to go onto www.diversityjobs.com, just to get an idea of the wide range of jobs that are out there in different fields that might be something that you're interested in. If you're a huge Nike fan, there might be an opportunity to do this work at Nike. If you really care about refugees, there are charity organizations that do diversity work within the refugee community. So there are lots of really great opportunities out there. And so I want to kind of talk a little bit how the business world, or the work world, which includes government, sort of defines these terms that we throw around a lot. So when we're talking about diversity, right, that's the name of this class. And, we want to know, does the organization, which can be Nike, or it could be City Hall in Portland, or Washington County hires diversity people to do work at the county level. Does that organization look like the community it serves? Who's in that community? I mean, this is one of the things that we've experienced, especially when we talk about DEI work and policing, that there was a lot of riots in the 1960s, and a lot of them were racially located, and they were largely black communities that were rising up because of over-policing by white police officers. And the Johnson administration, Lyndon B. Johnson, had a big study, why are the cities of America on fire? And what they found out was the primary thing is that the police departments didn't reflect what the communities look like. And their recommendation, this is in the 1960s, 1968, was you got to start hiring police officers that look like the communities that you're policing. If you've got a lot of Latino people in the community, you need to have some Latino police officers or Latinx police officers. If you've got a lot of immigrants in the community, you'll have to have people that are from those immigrant populations in the police department to bring those tensions down and have it be a more diverse police department. So that model of having a diverse police force is also to be reflected in the private sector as well. So when we're looking at diversity, does it reflect that community? And that includes the diversity in leadership, not just the people that are the rank and file at the bottom, or working on the management level. Does the leadership of that institution reflect the community? And so there is a shift in Atlanta when we talk about policing. That Atlanta has had ever since I was a kid a black mayor, because it's important that the diversity of the city government reflect the community, which is disproportionately African American. So the leadership diversity part is a key part of this notion of diversity, not just kind of hiring people on the ground level, getting people into positions of leadership that reflect that community that it serves. When we talk about equity, equity is different than equality. Equity is understanding that there have been sins of the past that have been rooted in bias and left people out. So equity is going to ask, do the policies and practices of any organization understand the past biases and work to make up for them, to try to create some upward movement of people who have been pushed out? How do we unmarginalize people who have been historically marginalized? You have to actually go out, and sometimes they don't even know that there's a table to be invited to. So you have to say, hey, we need you at this table. And there's been a lot of history in Portland, especially around the issue of housing, of people not only being displaced, but not being invited back in. We can say, oh, we're not racist anymore, or we practice equality. Equity is an actual action plan. You have to go out and do a little bit of homework and find out who needs to be invited to that table. So equity is trying to make up for, and sometimes equity involves ideas of reparations and restitutions. How do you make up for the sins of the past? How do you create something that, for example, addresses the incredible wealth gap that was created by racist housing policies, right? That might mean that certain communities get a break. In Portland, we had a neighborhood called Albina that we've discussed in this class. And that the black community was sort of forced in this community and then driven out by urban renewal projects, what James Baldwin called Negro removal projects, including the building of the Memorial Coliseum, the building of I-5, the expansion of the Legacy Emmanuel Hospital. All that pushed people out, and then gentrification. And so the city wants to address those past biases, and it can't just say, hey, we're going to give black people a deal if you buy a house in this neighborhood. But if you're a legacy resident, you've had family members that own property in that neighborhood, you do get a deal. So it's a way of kind of addressing the inequities of the past. And so that's an important part of equity. Equity is an action plan. And then when we talk about inclusion, who are we bringing in? Who are we bringing in especially who are we bringing in the important decision-making process? Who's being invited to this organization or this company to help shape the future? And how do we give them that sense of belonging? Sometimes this is called belonging work. That's sort of the new term in DEI work. Sometimes it's called DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And the inclusion part is how do we help people feel like they belong in this company, even though there might be a pretty biased history that it's been men only, or white people only, or Christians only, that they have been excluded. We have to do some work to make sure those people feel included. And so one of the reasons there's a big explosion in these jobs is there's a recognition that this is good. It's good for the bottom line. Kind of like when we were talking about women in the workforce, we know that there are benefits from bringing diverse people to that metaphorical table, kind of on three levels. One is bringing different cognitive styles in. People who think differently about things can solve problems in a unique and innovative way. And you want to kind of bring in people who have sort of different thought processes that might think outside the box that we've had. So we want to broaden that. We want to bring lifestyle diversity in. People coming from different backgrounds who bring in different ideas and different cultural experiences, and that makes things more productive. And then lastly, how that product is reflected in the community. What's the reputation of that brand? Nike had pretty challenging history in terms of its relationship to the black community, and many people in the black community felt that it was exploiting them. Nike had a thing in the 1990s where the shoe designers would come into Northeast Portland, hang out with some African American kids, get ideas from those kids, and then go back to Beaverton and design new shoes and make millions of dollars off of it. They called it broing, going in and hang out with the bros. And did those kids on the basketball court that gave them those ideas get any compensation? Nope. They just sort of stole their ideas and then made, millions of dollars on it. And so, when you can do work in that area, you can repair some of that, and you can develop a better reputation. And certainly, there are companies that have had to do that. Chick-fil-A with the LGBTQ community, Coors Beer with the minority community. I mean, there's a lot of companies that have sort of a bad mojo, bad reputation from what they're doing. So this DEI work can work to kind of build that brand respect, even if it's policing. I mean, here's a brand that's had a lot of problems, right? The cops, this notion of all cops are bastards and all that stuff. You do real work in the community around diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. You can repair some of that bad branding from the past, from the Bull Connor days, because the police have a long history. I mean, the police were rooted in slave patrols, so they've got a lot of work to do if they're going to rebrand themselves. So yeah, there are benefits. And then when we talk about this concept of diversity, there's a lot of different types of diversity. In fact, in the DEI community, they now recognize 34 different types of categories when we're talking about diversity. And these sort of fall into two general areas. There's the internal ones, or what we call the immutable characteristics, like race and gender, body size, things that are sort of part of you. And then there are the external characteristics, which are sort of the cultural characteristics, which can include your religion, but also your education level. Do we have people from public and private schools, people with GEDs, people who've been to, graduate school? There are those types of diversity categories too. So we think, there's this long list when you look at the 34. Just, for example, there's physical abilities and disabilities, mental health, neurodiversity, personality styles, cultural backgrounds, geographic locations, including from around the world. For some companies, it makes a lot of sense to have people who have lived in Asia, or have people who are connected to India to be part of their decision-making team. So that can really work. And this work overall kind of focuses on kind of 4 areas where this work really comes into handy in this line of work. First is hiring, right? You want to hire people, and you want to have people who are coming in who are reflective of the people that are being served. So, the joke about affirmative action, I worked at the affirmative action office at my previous university, and, affirmative action isn't hiring quotas. It doesn't say you have to hire anybody. It says you are supposed to make a good faith effort to recruit minority candidates so they see that the job is available. For example, when we had a position at the sociology department, we'd advertise for that position in the Black Sociological Journal. So African American sociologists can say, hey, there's a job here. So you have to make a good faith to recruit. And then when you get the qualified applicants in who are all like at the same level, and if there's an underserved population, let's say you don't have a Black sociologist, you say, well, we've got, an equally qualified sociologist who's Black. They're underrepresented in this category. Let's think about hiring them to get them in. It doesn't mean hiring unqualified people or less qualified people, or it doesn't mean any of that. The joke about the affirmative action office is we've got to you interview a bunch of minority candidates, and then you hire the white guy. The fact of when we look at affirmative action, the primary beneficiary of affirmative action has been white women, because gender is a part of the affirmative action guidelines, and it's really served to help women and veterans. Those are the 2 dominant groups helped by affirmative action. So when racists complain about affirmative action, they don't understand how it works, and then in fact, the way that it's worked has primarily helped white women and white veterans. Those are the 2 beneficiaries of affirmative action, top beneficiaries. Anyway, so hiring is a really important area to make sure we're bringing people in. Promotion. who moves up the ladder? I mean, there is all kinds of evidence, even in higher education, that women professors are less likely to receive tenure than male professors. Why is that? The notion that women are not as committed to an organization, or women are going to leave to have babies. And as we've talked about in a previous lecture, actually women are more likely to stay with a company. But how are people promoted up the ladder? And is there any bias in that? We're trying to eliminate the old boys club of the executive washroom, kind of the white men sitting around the table. For promoting people, we need to make sure that we're not reproducing those biases. So hiring, promotion, retention. How do we keep people in a company? Or how do we keep people in a nonprofit organization not leaving because it's a hostile work environment, or the culture that they've been brought in? I was on a panel on diversity at the University Club with the executive director of the Urban League, and she had a really good thing that I talked about that I'd never even thought about. Say Nike, and she was talking about Nike. Nike recognizes that it has a serious lack of black executives. So you're going to recruit black executives, kind of like Portland tries to recruit black police officers, because we have a small black population. So often they have to go outside of the city to find qualified black candidates for the Portland Police Bureau. So you're recruiting black executive officers and higher level management, people who've worked in other companies, so they go poach them and say, hey, come work for Nike. We don't do the broing stuff anymore, and we care about social justice, and we have cool commercials that show that we care about the world, and don't look at the sweatshop labor in Asia that makes these shoes. But in general, so you're hiring. Let's say you're hiring a 40-year-old black corporate executive from back east, and he's coming with his family. And we'll just use a male in this case, coming with his family, and they come to live in Washington County, and they get here, and it's a very white environment, and there's really no church to go to. There's no black vibrant community in Washington County the way they might have experienced back east, and also the police. And I've got I've got a 16-year-old son, just got his driver's license, and you want him driving his car around Washington County as an African American teenager? Right? I'll come to Nike and I'll work for a couple of years and I'll follow my contract, and then I'm going back to Philadelphia where I feel safe. So the idea of creating inclusive communities can really aid to the issue of retention. And then the fourth one is handling conflict in the workplace, or just in the workplace in general. That could be a nonprofit as well. That, how are people getting along? Are there issues around sexual harassment, on racial harassment? We've had workplaces in Portland where nooses have been hung, including at OSHU and on a construction site at Portland State University. What's the workplace climate like, and how are you going to handle those types of conflicts to make sure people are included and are not like, I'm out of here? So you have to be able to handle that. Traditionally, this line of work has been sort of housed in Human Resources Department. And Human Resources Department are basically the people that make sure everybody gets paid, make sure they get their benefits, kind of keep track of all the sort of hiring and personnel issues. But DEI work is a little bit separate, even though traditionally that's the place where the office has been, somewhere in the HR department. And there are kind of levels of jobs to be thinking about here. At the top are the kind of senior leadership positions. These include things like chief equity officers or vice president in charge of diversity and inclusion. I mean, these are the six-figure jobs that are really doing the sort of the leadership on this work. And they're kind of organized around four areas within these top leadership positions. One is developing the policies and the trainings. How are we going to make sure we have equitable policies about how we advertise, how we go out into the community, how we recruit new people, how we train our employees to be less harassing. So that's creating and supporting the diverse workforce is the second one, including creating groups. You might need a group for female doctors, or for Muslim teachers, whatever the agency is, to sort of support the diverse groups so they feel included. To recruit, the third one is to recruit from those diverse populations to work on jobs where our recruitment activities where we're going out to these communities to recruit people. And this is something that's been a big part of the Portland Police Force's work, the PPB, is, we have to figure out how to go out and recruit from these diverse communities that are underrepresented in our police force. We have to have policies that say, we're going to go out of the state. We're going to go back east, and we're going to say, hey, Portland's a pretty great place. It's a pretty white place, but it's a pretty great place. We would love you to come and work for our police department because we need more blank police officers. And then the fourth one is how you measure your progress. These are the indexes and the metrics that we create. This is where sociologists are really handy in the world of DEI. How we create these metrics about how well we're doing. How happy are people in their workplace? How diverse is the actual workforce? What percentage of the workforce, for example, is transgender compared to what percentage of the population the community is transgender? Like, how much are things matching up? So that's a little bit of statistical and research work, including doing surveys. You want to be able to give anonymous surveys to your employees to feel, is there something we need to know about that's not being done to better serve your sense of inclusion? So sociologists are very, very suited for this position. Then after the senior leadership positions, you get the sort of middle management positions that do DEI work. These are often called the managers, and they're often hired to do sort of the supportive work, especially around particular DEI metrics, like we need more racial diversity. We need work around the sexual harassment issues. And so managers are brought in. And then there are what are called the individual level DEI jobs. These are the analysts. Sometimes people are called in to analyze how diverse an environment is, and they'll do some of the sociological work. The people who are the consultants, they can say, here's how you do outreach to this community, and the trainers, people that lead these trainings. So this is the level of the work that I do. I'm called in often by everything from school boards, the federal government, and that's a good one, police departments, law firms, and a couple others I'm probably forgetting, to do these trainings. So, for example, I've been doing a training with the federal government for the last year about COVID and how COVID helps us to understand the inequities in our larger social system. Why are some populations vaccine hesitant, for example? Or why is there a higher death rate for Latinx people of COVID than other populations, and what do we do about it? So you get hired in to do these trainings, and so you can do your outside work and then also work as a consultant as well. And there are diversity consultant companies that just do this work, that just show up to do trainings. I do a training on intersectionality, and I do a training on bias in the workplace, and you come in and you get paid and you leave. You get paid for your trainings. So the goals in general are kind of twofold. One is, the main goal is to help employees feel more included, more welcomed and valued, and really boost the general morale. And as we talked about early on in this class, when people can be their true selves, their true gendered selves and sexual selves and religious selves and racial selves and cultural selves, they are 4.5 times more dedicated to the goals of the organization and work harder. If you're showing up to work and you feel like nobody listens to you, nobody cares about you, maybe they're harassing you and saying things about you behind your back, why are you going to care about giving your all to this company? You're going to put that energy towards your community or your church or your, wherever you find that sense of ethnic identity or cultural support. It's not going to be at work. So if we can make people feel included at work, that's where their energy goes. So that's the bottom line right there. Is this pays off. But I think the truth about this work is that DEI jobs are designed to make DEI jobs obsolete. That the idea is that at some point down the road, diversity will be just a natural thing. We won't have to hire somebody to make sure we have a diverse workforce. And equity will be dealt with as part of our values. It'll be hardwired into an extension of our corporate and company and nonprofit goals. And inclusion will just be, the natural order of things. So we'll of course be inclusive at some point. But this isn't anytime soon. DEI jobs are not going away for the next 30 years. So if you want to go in this field, you've got some security for a while. In fact, it's growing. Um, and this work kind of focuses around kind of 6 levels, just sort of highlighting sort of the way we think about this. First of all, working with a hiring team, and focused on hiring to make sure that we're not reproducing that old boys network, the corporate, the white men sitting around the table. That we have to do the outreach to certain communities and figuring out how the people who are doing the hiring can do that. So that's one thing that DI work does, one of the tasks. The other is developing policies. We want to have policies in schools and policies in workplaces and policies in government organizations that put these DEI values into practice, including on hiring and retention and resolution management. The third one is promoting open communication. People have to feel like they can express how they feel. I've talked to a lot of people. I was doing a training for a federal agency, which will remain nameless, and an African-American woman came up to me afterwards and said, yeah, we can't really talk here because the management's all white, and you don't want to be branded as a troublemaker, and I'm somewhat hesitant of voicing my complaints because I'll be seen as an uppity black woman. She made the air quotes when she said that. And so I feel like I really can't. I appreciate you saying some of these things, Randy, but I can't say it. So that's something we're trying to interrupt, is people feeling like they can't express themselves and their concerns because of a culture of exclusion. Creating opportunities for people to connect. What's the workplace culture like? Do people hang out together? Is there a place where there can be socializing? And this can even be like creating sports leagues. I mean, this has been sort of a DEI activity over the last few years. Let's have a softball league where people can kind of get out and mix it up, and instead of going into their separate little boxes after work, or we can sort of create sort of an opening and welcoming workplace. Food is a good way of doing that. Food to bring people together, have different cultural foods. To mentor employees, to invest in and mentor the employees, and especially employees who are from marginalized populations. Make sure that they have someone above them, in a rank above them, that can help them understand the culture of the institution. And so not to just leave them out to dangle. We've hired we've got our Muslim hire over there, so good luck. Good luck. No, you have someone to kind of help, bring them in to the diverse culture, and to promote the benefits of the company in a way that attracts diverse populations. I mean, we have certain populations that need more flexible work hours, so they can participate more with their family, more childcare, right? That might attract a certain underserved population. There's this notion of floating holidays. Yeah, we're getting Christmas off and we're not getting Ramadan, but maybe instead of taking Memorial Day, you can take Passover. You can sort of move the holidays around to fit your ethnic identity or your religious background. And so policies like that will bring more people to the table. Just being more flexible in general, which I think is going to be a natural thing after COVID. So the last thing I want to say is about getting into diversity work. For some of you, I know, are already doing this work, which is cool. And you already have your foot in the door, and just some things to think about if you want to go in this direction. The first thing is, of course, how you frame your resume, how you think about what you look like on paper to someone who wants to do this work. So you want to be able to highlight these aspects, even if you weren't working in the DEI field. So if you're working at McDonald's, for example, you can talk about working in a diverse environment at McDonald's and how that helped you appreciate the value of a diverse environment. So you want to sort of highlight the issues, or if you worked in a non-diverse environment, why you saw that as problematic. If everybody where I worked looked like me and we suffered for it, so you highlight that. But also, and I mention this a lot, you want to get volunteer work in there. Volunteer work is so useful. So many of the jobs I get to do these trainings are because of the volunteer work I do in the community. And I meet people and they're like, "Hey, Randy, can you do a training on this topic?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Here's my website, randyblazak.com. There's a button there that says hire me. That the volunteer work really opens a lot of doors, but it also on a resume shows that you care about these issues. So it's good for your soul. Apparently, it'll help you to get into heaven. Somebody told me. But it also looks amazing on a resume, especially if you want to work in this field. So that's that. Also, when you're applying for jobs, you're writing a cover letter. Why you want this job, why you think you're personally suited for this job, and it reflects that your interest in the goals of diversity, equity, inclusion, but also highlights your journey through the world of diversity, your obstacles, your intersectionality, your experience with inclusion, your recognition of the benefit of inclusion. You want to kind of really frame yourself as someone who cares about this issue and is passionate about this issue. And the third thing is just make sort of this work, especially on the idea of social justice, incorporate it into your life. It's a part of your passion, and it will help you make those connections into the community, whether it's through your church or through your volunteer work or through your internet circle. You just want to make social justice kind of a part of your identity, and then that translates into why you should be suitable for this job. So I just wanted to kind of throw those thought ideas out there if people are thinking about ways to take the experience of this class or your interest in these issues and turn it into a job or a full-on career. There's incredible opportunity. This is a great time to be doing this work. And I think you can put this class on your resume, that you took this class, that you did your project, and then hopefully you'll be part of that institutional change, whether it's in your religious institution or your government institution or your private institution, working for a bank. All this work needs to be done out there, and that's how we change it. We change it from the inside. All right, hope that was useful. There's one last discussion question coming up in a bit, and thanks very much. I've really enjoyed it, and hope all these lectures have sort of fit together in a way of creating an understanding of why we take on this work with such passion. All right.